So they asked me to talk about alternate forages, and lots of interest in it. I really think it's important. You know, we talk about these alternatives for nutritionists and agronomists. Sometimes we get in our own silo, and I think it's important to work with farmers and everybody get together to try to figure some of this out, things that we can grow well and get that provide some forage security, if you like, and also be able to get cheap milk out of cows. I think that's really important. So why is there so much interest in alternate forages? Alfalfa and alfalfa grass, of course, have been kind of our mainstay along with corn silage for years and years. It's worked really well. Sometimes we have some agronomic challenges, of course. But there's more interest now, you know, in these annuals, mostly annuals, or winter annuals. So winter triticale and fall rye, sorghum Sudan and Sudan grass, including some of the cocktail mixes where we throw a bunch of these together. I'll talk about that. Italian ryegrass, spring cereals and cereal pea mixtures. We've been doing that for a long time. Maybe we could do a better job at it. Little bit of interest in forage soybeans. You know, this all kind of came about. Land's a lot more expensive. It's harder to rent. It costs more. And then, of course, we've gone through some years when we've had really tight forage inventories. We've had some winter kill issues, consecutive years where we've had a lot of winter injury in the spring, some droughts, and we were in a situation where the cupboard was bare in a lot of situations, and we didn't know whether we were going to have enough forage to get through the year, and people needed to, of course, there's always pressure from these corn and soybeans taking those forage acres. But I think we are in a better situation this year, forage inventory-wise. There seems to be more carryover inventory going into this next year. So, but people are looking at these double crop options to try to increase yields and still maintain decent forage quality. You know, and of course they happen to be annuals, which you know, reduces your risk of alfalfa winter kill or winter injury, which we tend to have some problems with. But keep in mind that, oh geez, you can't see the screen that well, but I can see it. But perennial forages, you know, alfalfa grass, they are a great winter cover crop, and some of these other annuals are too. When we look at our forage goals, you know, what are we trying to do? We're trying to maximize, we're really trying to produce digestible forage, digestible fiber. And, you know, we know that gives us higher intakes, more milk, less purchased feed, but we also want decent crude protein levels with good protein utilization as well. And we need to get, you know, land's expensive, we need to get high yields, milk per ton, milk per acre. Most crops, most forage crops require a good harvest management, aggressive harvest management to try to get that at the quality, the high digestibility, the high proteins that we want. You know, the exceptions, I guess, are corn silage and forage soybeans and single cut sorghums. But mostly a big part of it is harvest management. So when you get your analysis back from the lab, what are the first numbers you look at? What really piques your interest? Anybody care to volunteer? What do you like to see? ADF, NDF, what else?
Crude protein.
Crude protein, that's probably the, you know, what everybody says. And, you know, we've come a long way. I did my postgrad in dairy nutrition 40 years ago. And we've learned a lot, and you know, we were very crude protein oriented at the time. Basically, crude protein, you know, is the nitrogen times 6.25. We knew how to measure it. That was the big thing. Whereas forage digestibility, I remember doing, you know, in vitro and in situ nylon bag trials, trying to figure out how to measure digestible energy, and we really didn't have a handle on it, but. You know, we've come a long way. We still have lots to learn, I think, but we've come a long way, in measuring that. And you know what, I guess what I like to look at is one of the things that I think gets overlooked is the digestibility. And we used to just assume all fibers, all NDF was equally digestible. And we know that's not anywhere close to being true, right? And so I like those numbers. You know, the NDFD, you know, at a 30 hour or something is fairly commonly used. The 240 really is the undigestible fiber, NDF, and so that's what's limiting intakes. So of course we want a low value there. But for me, those are some of the interesting numbers to look at when you're getting your feed test back from some of these alternative forages and your alfalfa grass as well. Alfalfa grass mixtures, kind of our mainstay in dairy forage, provides its own nitrogen. You don't have to seed it down every year. It's perennial, pretty good quality. You know, we've got newer grasses now and lots of interest in alfalfa grass as opposed to straight alfalfa. And there's some benefits to that, adding grasses, these modern improved varieties and species into that. We've moved away from Timothy to the fescues and late maturing orchard grasses, those things. And we do see our plots, we show a consistent yield benefit by adding some grass to alfalfa. I don't think we should necessarily move away and give up on alfalfa. And that happens sometimes. We get into situations where we get winter kill, you know, but I just don't think we should move away totally from alfalfa grass. I think these alternative annual forages have their place. I think they complement the alfalfa grass very well, and we can provide some extra, have the benefit of providing extra yield as well. So I'm not going to talk a lot about alfalfa grass. I'm going to try to get into alternative forages, but I think that before you give up on alfalfa, I think there's some things we could do to really improve alfalfa, these perennials. And you know, agronomists tend to focus on corn and soybeans and wheat, and forages are kind of the forgotten a little bit. But I think if we shorten our stand age, keep those stands, our rotations reasonably short, that's important. Fertility, I see this as a big weakness on some farms for getting decent yields and decent winter survival. Phosphorus, potash, sulfur, I think is really important. Weed control, we don't necessarily do a great job on weed control. Establishment is another one. And we shorten our rotation up with alfalfa. You know, we think it costs money to seed a field down, right? And it does. But it's a perennial, so we're going to get 3 years or whatever out of it. But as stands age, we lose yield. We have that yield loss because we tend to have our maximum yield the year following establishment. And then yields start to come down, and you know, after 4 years or so, we're down to maybe 70% of what we got in the year after establishment. So we want to keep those short, and also we want to reduce the risk of winter kill because it's old stands that usually winter kill on us. If you use the OMAFR nitrogen credit of 100 pounds with alfalfa following corn and putting corn in after alfalfa, you know, we used to figure it was 60 cents a pound. Now it's over $1, right? So, but there's a $100 credit to the corn crop following alfalfa. And then we have that rotational benefit to the corn as opposed to corn after alfalfa. We've got another 10 to 15% of yield increase to the corn following that old hayfield. So that's, you know, $100 to $150. So we're looking at $200, $250 an acre benefit to the corn crop. That more than pays for the establishment of a new field someplace, shortening that rotation. It really doesn't cost anything to seed a new field down because it's being the benefit to the corn crop pays for it. So if in doubt, rotate. 6 forage establishment mistakes, poor seedbed and packing. I see that all the time. I look at fields that don't establish well and they weren't packed properly. The seed placement wasn't correct. Neglecting soil fertility and pH. Combining cereal nurse crops. You know, our grandparents did that. We don't need to do that anymore. We need to harvest those nurse crops as forage and get them off. And I see that consistently, that is a problem when we combine that nurse crop. Using cheap seed, poor weed control, and not establishing those fields enough. Good fertility. Removal rates are really high, and they're high with these alternate forages as well. You know, all those species, the removal rates are reasonably similar. They might differ a bit, but you're looking at maybe 12 to 15 pounds of phosphate, 55 pounds of potash. You know, we used to, for years, we always used that benchmark at $1.50 a pound. And of course, you know, our fertilizer, we're up probably over 3 cents now. Pretty significant cost. Potash levels are probably the biggest limitation, and there's lab results to show that. If everybody fertilize their perennial forages every year, yeah, who doesn't? You know, I mean, everybody's going to say, yeah, I do that, but many people don't. And you know, we wouldn't think of growing corn and soybeans without a fertilizer application. And yet a lot of people, or maybe they put a small amount of manure on or something like that. But you can really, you know, in 4 years or 3 years, you can really, because the removal rates are so high with alternate forages or whatever, you can really drop the soil test level to low levels where it's costing you a lot of yield. So yeah, you know, get a soil test. You know, just for, you know, 3 tons is going to remove 42 pounds of phosphate, 165 pounds of K2O. That's equivalent to 80 pounds of MAP and 275 pounds of muriate of potash. So I'm just trying to put this in perspective of how important fertility is. Liquid manure, people say, yeah, but I apply manure, you know, so I'm good. Liquid manure at, you know, say 4,000 gallons, that's going to give you 50 pounds of N, 45 of P, and 90 of K. And removal rate on 4 tons would remove 56 pounds of P and 208 pounds of K. So yeah, you're kind of almost in there for phosphorus, but you're only putting on half as much potash with that kind of an application. And so just, you know, I think nutrient management planning is good. And sulfur is another one. You know, we never used to see a response to sulfur. I think this is important for alternative forages as well. We used to have lots of pollution blow in on us from west of us and provide all this cheap sulfur. We don't have that anymore. I consistently see yield benefits to sulfur and also crude protein levels in feed. And we've seen some really dramatic yield increases when we do that. So I think basically all forage crops almost need a little bit of sulfur. You can see this was a plot at the Elora Research Station. You can see in the center there, no sulfur applied. You can see those strips. You know, we would have blamed that to drought, right? That was kind of a dry year. We would have just said, oh, that's drought. That's not my fault. It was really sulfur deficient. That's one where they put elemental sulfur down before establishment. And you can see on the right here with sulfur, no sulfur. It's a huge difference. And I really notice it when I'm out looking at fields. Tough-looking stands can really respond to sulfur. Winter injured, something. Another one is nitrogen. And this is really key for, nitrogen and sulfur are really key for alternative forages. Not only to increase yield, but also to, maybe more importantly, to increase crude protein. Protein costs a lot, and so does nitrogen, but we have an opportunity to get those grass species, those alternative forage annual grasses to test well. So that's enough of that. I'm going to move on to these alternatives, and really a lot of them are give us an opportunity to double crop because they grow in different times of the year. There are some rotation, options, and that's a big part of this puzzle is trying to figure out what rotation that we're going to try to work in. So after corn silage and soybeans and sorghum, in September we can fall that in with winter cereals, either rye or triticale. Sudan grass and sorghum Sudans, really we don't want to plant that till last week of May, 1st of June, something like that. And then it's done with frost. And then another window is after cereals in August. Yep.
Joey, have you come across much corn silage going in after a first cut? So taking the first cut off and
yeah.
then putting in corn. Is that catching on at all?
No, I don't think so. It can sometimes be really disappointing. Greg Stewart did some research on that years ago, and I'm not saying it doesn't always work, but it's fairly high risk. Yeah. As opposed to maybe Sudan grass, I think would probably perform a little better following an old beat up disappointing hayfield. The oats, peas, the Italian ryegrass in August is another opportunity. So sorghum, Sudan grass and sorghum Sudan. Anybody grow these? Anybody tried them? Yeah. How'd you make out? All good? Yeah. People have been growing sorghum Sudan for a long time. It's pretty impressive when it's managed right, fertility is right, everything. So these are warm season annuals, so they like heat. They have a high yield potential. They're fairly drought tolerant. I mean, they like moisture, but they're probably more drought tolerant than say corn or some of the other crops. There are BMR types now, which have improved forage digestibility. Agronomically, I don't think the BMR trait is an issue. These species are very frost sensitive, both in the spring and in the fall. So, and we had some frozen off in late May last year. People got in there and planted a little too early. And I don't know if they killed the stands, but they certainly set them back. And then once we get that good frost in the fall, that's the end of it. You really don't want to plant this crop until soil temperature is in that 65 degree Fahrenheit, 18 degrees Celsius type soil temperature. And that would be taken, I just use a meat thermometer and a cooking thermometer, stick it in there. I probably do it in the morning, not in the heat of the day when the sun's there. But as farmers, we're wired, we want to get in there when we can, right? And if it's good in the 1st of May, we're just wired to want to get it in the ground. And it's really counterintuitive because this species does not like cold soils. It stunts the plant. You're not gaining anything, you're actually losing something, as well as the risk of a late spring frost. We have seen it go in after that low first cut, that disappointing first cut, when we go, whoa, that field was really winter injured. I've only got half a first cut here. What am I going to do? Should I, whatever? There is an opportunity to go to Sudan grass, and the calendar's not as much of an issue, right? Because we don't want to plant it till the 1st of June, anyways, and it could be done later. Chris?
What's your experience with no-till and sorghum?
I like a no-till drill, but I like it in a tilled seed bed.
You just don't warm it up?
Yeah, exactly. Where are we now? So there's different types out there. We've got the sorghum Sudans, the hybrids. We've got Sudan grass, and this is the one that I prefer, actually, the BMR Sudan grasses. They can be very high quality when cut aggressively. We've also got lots of interest, or some, I shouldn't say lots, some interest, Chris, in single cut forage sorghums. We've got the problem with I guess there's a desire to grow that single cut, maybe to substitute for corn silage. Instead of cutting every 3 times or 2 times, we can just cut it once. The problem with sorghums is that they have most sorghums is that they have a seed head with a fairly narrow stalk, narrower than corn quite a bit, and so they're top heavy and they fall over and they lodge is the problem. So the researchers have kind of come up with different approaches to try to get around that, to mitigate it. And one is the male sterile, so there's no pollen, so there's no seed head, right? And then we've got these brachytic dwarf ones where we've got short internodes between the leaves. So we've, theoretically we've got the same number of leaves but shorter stem internodes between the leaves. And then these photoperiod sensitive, so they have delayed heading. They go by how much light there is in a day, and so it kind of delays heading. There's also a trait called dry stalk, which you got a dry stalk, and it helps get to that silage moisture when you want to harvest it. But I think we do need more research on this. Some people have. I'm really not on board to recommend it to everybody. I still like the multi-cuts until we get the agronomics and the harvest management figured out on this crop. Is that fair? So yeah, I think maybe comparing the sorghum Sudan versus Sudan grass, maybe the sorghum Sudan has a slightly higher yield potential, possibly, but I think the Sudan grass has a higher quality potential. It has a finer stem on it. Yield potential. You can take off a pile of feed with this stuff. You still want to harvest timely. Usually we say, and nitrogen and sulfur are important. I covered that, I think. But NDFDs are reasonably high when you harvest this stuff timely. Usually we're looking at about 45 days from planting to first cut. We kind of use a rule of thumb, 45 days or 45 inches high, whichever comes first. And then you'd be cutting 30 days later for second cut. And then depending on planting date and frost date and all that, it grows a little slower in the fall because it likes heat, it likes summer heat. So it grows a little slower, so you might be 40 days or something. You want to get that harvested before killing frost. Yep.
Do you see a range in protein between first, second, and third?
No, not really. When it's fertilized, you got to do split applications and yeah, I have it. You would if you didn't do a split application, I think. Yeah. So warm soil temperature. I talked about that. Not before the last week of May. Just fight the urge to get on the tractor and do that. Like a burn down, clean fields, some light tillage. We talked about that. Seeding depth on the Sudan grass, probably 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, maybe a little deeper, 3/4 to an inch on the sorghum Sudans. Firm seed bed, packing, really important again, always important with forage crops. A no-till drill works great, but I still like to see some tillage before that. Seeding rates. So Sudan grass, we've got a recommended seeding rate at about 25-30 pounds. Maybe, a lot of people are seeding the sorghum Sudan at maybe 40 pounds, but there's more and more, especially dairy farmers that are going higher rates, 60 pounds or more, and they're trying to make that finer, because of the higher plant population, they're trying to make it finer stemmed. I don't think there's any advantage to seed cost-wise. You've got cheaper seed here, but you're using twice as much. I don't think that's. I prefer the Sudan grass myself, the BMR Sudan grass. Split applications. If you're not willing to put nitrogen on, don't bother. We kind of use a rule of thumb, maybe 50 pounds, 50 pounds of actual N per ton of dry matter of expected yield. And all these crops that's kind of in the ballpark, I think. Sulfur, I think, is really important, not just for yield, but probably more so for percent protein. The P and K removals they're fairly, all these species are fairly similar per ton of dry matter.
How much sulfur do you recommend? What's sulfur?
So usually eight to, it's kind of a 10 to 1 ratio of nitrogen to sulfur. Some people say 8 to 1 in there someplace. So sulfur is a tricky one because it's a bit like nitrogen. It leaches, it's volatile, it changes throughout the year, and there's not a good soil test for it. There's a tissue test for it that I think is more accurate if you suspect sulfur deficiency, or do a test strip or something like that. So weed control, there's not a lot of weed control that people do, because the plant, once it gets to 6 or 7 leaf stage, it takes off and it canopies over and it's very competitive against weeds. But before that, it's a bit like corn, it's slow to get going. And I have seen some fields where there was a lot of broadleaf annual pressure, and it did impact establishment and did impact the yields of that. So in those cases, if you look in Pub 75 under sorghums, there are some broadleaf annual herbicide options there. Good rotational weed control, that's important for all forage crops really, and a glyphosate burn down. Harvest, I said that it's kind of slow initially, 45 days or 45 inches for that first cut, so you're looking at 6 weeks. The second cut really takes, it really can come on quickly. It can actually out yield the first cut. Rapid regrowth. Can make it into haylage or baleage. You're not going to get it to dry for dry hay. You need to cut it fairly high. There's 2 internodes down at the growing points when you cut it, one down at the ground level and one about 3 or 4 inches. So you want to make sure when you're cutting it, you leave that second node and you get faster regrowth and more tillering. And if you shave it close to the ground, you cut off that internode, you're going to have less. It's maybe counterintuitive, but the higher you cut, the more regrowth you'll get. 3 cuts are possible if you got it planted in decent time and you didn't get an early frost. That last cutting is always a bit of an issue because you want to take it before frost because that plant loses quality pretty quickly. You did that, Glenn. Yeah.
I screwed up.
Did you? Okay.
I didn't wait long enough after the frost.
Oh, okay.
Cut it.
Okay. Yeah.
I tested it, it was 2 months later, it was still really high.
Still high in nitrates.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not prussic acid. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's
yeah.
Hey Joe, if you cut it and you get a frost, like you're like me and you're cutting her close to the wire all the time, and you cut it and you get a frost that night on the windrow.
Yeah. The issue with prussic acid, there's 2 issues here. One's nitrates and one's prussic acid. And the prussic acid, so the plant, it ruptures the cells and then it produces prussic acid. It is a gas and it dissipates. When you're fermenting feed, it's not a high risk. I'm not saying it's 0 risk, but when you're pasturing, that's a huge risk. Like if you're pasturing these sorghums, you're strip grazing or something, and there's frost in the forecast, you get the cattle off of there. But when you're fermenting it, letting it fully ferment, it's not a huge issue. And keep in mind too that sorghums are the highest in prussic acid potential, and then the sorghum Sudans, and then the Sudan grasses are lower. The nitrates can always be an issue, and we see this in other crops too. It's silo gas, really. It's that when we cut after that drought-ending rain, right? Because the plant can't metabolize those nitrates, and it builds up, and then we get high nitrate feed, and we get silo gas, basically. And that's a risk with all grasses, not just these. So, underseeding. Anybody under Sudan grass? Glenn did that. Yeah. How'd it go? Yeah. So we're, it's counter, when I remember this being proposed 20 years ago, I thought, no, that can't work. You can't be seeding alfalfa in June. But it actually seems to work fairly well. And I think maybe it works better than oats as a nurse crop, actually. I think there's less competition down at the seedling level. That sorghum, it's a little slower to get out of the ground at first than, say, oats. And then it pops up and canopies over and protects the new seeding. We've seen some good results with it. We usually suggest a seeding rate of 20 pounds of Sudan grass, and then whatever, 18 to 12, 20 pounds of alfalfa grass, whatever. Yeah, Chris?
Does that work then if you do the summer seeding?
I probably wouldn't do it in a summer seeding for a number of reasons. The Sudan grass is slower to grow, probably, and I don't know what you're talking, a mid-August seeding or something. Yeah, so that's too late for sorghums. It's too late, and it just might be more competition once it gets going, So I think a no-till drill works well. Some people mix the two of them together, put it through the cereal box. Some people use the small seed box and the cereal box for the Sudan grass. Half an inch deep max. You got to make it a little shallower. I think when you're underseeding, fertility would be the same. Don't put manure on it afterwards. Now the big question is, what do you do in September, right? Because you normally wouldn't go cut new seedings in middle of September. So what do you do? Well, some people make that second cutting in August and call it a day, and other people wait until closer to frost and try to cut high. You leave some stubble there. And I've seen both done, and seems to work fairly well. There's a picture there. You can see the Sudan grass and the new alfalfa coming through there, and it looks pretty good. There are also, some people refer to them as cocktail mixes. So that would be using a Sudan grass or sorghum Sudan and adding Italian ryegrass and possibly some clover, maybe some berseem or an annual clover, or a red clover if you wanted to be hopeful and make a cutting in the following May. Some people, yeah. So the whole theory there is that you've got this warm season crop, the Sudan grass, that's going to really grow well in hot summer, July, August. Then when it cools off in September, it's not as keen to grow. But the Italian ryegrass, it doesn't like that summer weather, but it likes the fall weather, that cooler, more moisture. So it takes off. And frost isn't going to kill it, right? So you're going to extend that fall growing season with some really high quality feed. We did some plots, Fred did some plots and kind of separated out, went through by hand and separated out the Sudan grass from the Italian ryegrass from the clover to try to figure out, I think they had red clover, try to figure out what was really adding the added benefit. And the Italian ryegrass added a lot of forage quality to that mix and that fall cutting. And also some yield, because it was still going to grow. I'm running out of time here.
That would be in the stuff that's not underseeded, right?
What's that?
That would be in the stuff that's not underseeded?
Yeah.
The ryegrass and stuff?
Yeah, no, you wouldn't want to, like you are underseeding to Italian ryegrass, I guess you could, yeah. But no, you wouldn't even think about doing it with anything else, with a perennial, because you just smother it out. Italian ryegrass is a lousy companion crop. It's because it tillers out and grows short and tillers, and winter annuals don't work. Winter triticale, fall rye, anybody doing that? Yeah, and how's it going? Good. Yeah, good. So we're going to seed that in September, early October, maybe after corn silage or early soybeans or something like that. It provides cover crop benefits. It's they're winter annuals, right? So it's there growing over the winter, providing all those cover crop benefits. It suppresses weeds. It adds organic matter. It's all good. One thing to remember is that you have to manage this as a forage crop and not a cover crop. And some people, they want to do it cheap and they want to do it fast and they broadcast the seed and not put enough fertilizer on it and they're disappointed in the results. But they followed a cover crop program, not a forage type program. So you're going to harvest this stuff, at flag leaf stage. That's really important. Everybody knows what flag leaf is. It's that last leaf that comes up before it heads. And, that's kind of the target for dairy quality feed. You could let it get more mature if you want for heifers or whatever. But, for dairy quality, we're looking at flag leaf. You can follow that, after you get that harvested. You could follow it with Sudan grass, I think is a great option. Possibly corn silage, late planted soybeans, something like that. There's a manure application window before and after these crops when conditions are good and you can get at it. Probably doesn't work as well on those really wet, poorly drained fields. Looks pretty nice, can make high quality. We've got 2.5 tons an acre dry matter. It really depends on seeding date and fertility and harvest date and all those things. But usually for flag leaf, timely harvested, we see a lot of 16% crude proteins, but we have seen over 18 when it's got the nitrogen and the sulfur. NDFs can be good, fairly high in NDFD, fiber digestibility. Once it gets to head to merge, the qualities start to drop and become heifer dry cow feed fairly quickly. So I get asked a lot, well, fall rye or winter triticale? We've been doing fall rye for longer than we've been doing winter triticale. The big difference is the maturity. Triticale is a cross between wheat and rye, right? So when we look at that flag leaf, when those species hit flag leaf, rye is going to head the earliest, and then the triticale is going to do that, and then the wheat, and it's probably maybe a week or so in between those each. So rye, it's really early, fast maturing, and it happens that harvest window is really tight. And you get a rain delay, you get a few days of wet weather and you can't get it harvested, it goes from that dairy quality feed to heifer feed or whatever really, really quickly. I think the triticale is a little later. It's probably a week later to that flag leaf stage anyway, and I think that it's a wider window. It's a lot more forgiving if you get some mid-May wet weather, a lot more forgiving. I prefer the winter triticale in most situations, unless it's maybe late planted in the fall, then you might want to consider the rye. So the advantage of, some people say, yeah, but I want the early heading because then I can get the next crop in earlier, right? And yeah, but if you get rain, it's all going to be harvested the same time anyway, right? Except the triticale is going to be higher quality. Triticale tends to be maybe shorter than the fall rye, but there's more tillering, more dense canopy there. The fall rye might have, if you've got lots of manure on it or something, lots of nitrogen, there might be a little more risk of lodging. People ask about the allelopathic effect, and it probably isn't a big deal in most forage situations. You're removing that top growth. And some people say, yeah, well, the crop I followed it with wasn't worth a damn, and I think allelopathy maybe gets blamed more for it than it should, and a big part of it is it sucks a lot of moisture. When that rye is growing, in early May, it is really rocking. It is using a lot of moisture. In a dry year, I think maybe that is more of an issue. You should completely kill that, burn down that that rye. Some tillage, I think, is important. Seeding dates. So research from, Tom Kilser did the research in New York State, but optimum time is about 10 to 14 days before what we would consider our optimum time to plant wheat for grain, right? And we've all, if you look in Pub 296 there, there's that map. Those are the dates that you get the best wheat yield if you plant on those dates. So it's not too early, it's not too late. And then, so, we'd want to optimally, if everything else was, if we could do it, then we'd want to be planting this triticale 10 to 14 days before that. So that's getting fairly early. We maybe don't have those crops, the previous crop off, so it's going to be delayed. So should you not do it? Well, no. You're just giving up some yield opportunity when you delay. When you get really late, your yield, your opportunity for getting a decent yield it drops off. You also increase your risk of winter kill, heaving, that type of thing. You do get, the reason why you want the earlier planting is because you get more tillering. So it's kind of the opposite of growing wheat for grain, right? You want these plants to tiller in the fall because you have more coming into the spring and more growth. Also with earlier plantings, we do get higher yield, but also maybe a slightly earlier harvest date, which we want because we can get the next crop in slightly earlier too. So under good conditions, probably 100 pounds an acre seeding rate. It's got to be fairly deep, an 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches. That's important so that it doesn't heave and gets the root system under it. Firm, well-prepared seed bed, as always. Those shallow plantings, broadcasting, they're more prone to heaving and injury and winter kill, and they're not going to yield worth a darn anyway. Fertility, nitrogen, if you get it in early enough, there might be a benefit to putting on, Tom Kilser's research indicates there might be a benefit to putting a little bit of nitrogen on in the fall, or manure. I think most people put manure on ahead of time and incorporate it, and that gives you more tillering. I wouldn't bother, if you're not going to get it in decent time, I think that's a waste of money probably on a later planting. In the spring, 100 pounds of nitrogen at green up, with a bit of sulfur as well, and that's for increased yield and increased crude protein. Sulfur, yeah, that 1 to 10 ratio. Yep, Bruce?
So you say you want to plant it earlier than wheat, so you can plant it after corn silage harvest?
Yeah.
Okay, so then you take it off in the spring, can you plant corn silage there again? Is that too late and not a good rotation?
Probably not. You're going to take that off in the late May. I talked about that a bit, about corn after. You could do it. I mean, and some people do. I'm really short in corn silage. Yeah, it have to be, and I'm not sure if there isn't a little bit of risk there in a dry year. Yeah. So we talked about, that going from flag leaf to boot stage. Really got to be ready to go. That's just some of the economics of that delayed planting, how much soybean yield you're giving up with that extra week or 10 days of delayed planting. I really like going in with Sudan grass. You can put up, your double crop forage program then, and you can put up a pile of feed, and you're really not giving up any yield to that, to the Sudan grass. Italian ryegrass, anybody grow that? Yeah, how do you like that?
Stopped growing it.
Stop growing it?
Yeah, it was fine though. It was just more work.
Yeah, it's kind of management intensive, I would call it.
Yeah.
You got to follow the recipe fairly closely, or it doesn't work.
We used it a lot. We used to grow most of the grasses, and we use it on a newsstand to get some first year yield. Yeah,
Okay. Really high quality stuff. It's a winter annual, like winter wheat. So it's not going to form a stem and a head the year that you seed it. It needs to vernalize, go through winter before it'll shoot up and form a stem and a head. So that year that you seed it, it is really rocket fuel type stuff. And nutritionists complain that that it's hard to balance sometimes because it has, you know, I've seen NDFDs, you know, at 80%, and you got to, you know, be careful how you feed it, right? So normally you'd summer seed that in August. You could take a fall harvest in October, which is kind of hard, you know, weather dependent, right? You don't want too much growth going into winter, but you want enough, or it'll winter kill. And then when you do overwinter it, then you go in May, and you know, third week of May or something, take that first cut, and then you could either keep it, and you know, if it's a good stand and you're getting rain, and then harvest it every 28 days or month or whatever, or you could burn that down and then rotate to something else depending on the stand. But it is really high quality stuff. Sometimes winter kills. Glenn McNeil actually kind of pioneered growing the Italian ryegrass. Exceptionally high NDFD, high sugar. RFQs are always through the roof. It really requires nitrogen if you want the crude protein and the yield. Cut high at 4 inches. You get more. All grasses are like that. Perennial forage grass species as well. It's counterintuitive. You know, we cut alfalfa really close with our disc bines now, and it's okay because it grows. The growing points are crown buds, whereas grasses need, you know, a few inches of growth. It doesn't have the root reserves that alfalfa does for regrowth, and it needs a little bit of solar panel there, you know, so it needs 4 inches of tissue and regrow. And it's counterintuitive, but if you cut grasses higher, you actually get more regrowth. You get more yield because you get faster and more regrowth. Establishment, it's pretty fast and easy to establish. Really light and fluffy seed, 1/4 of an inch deep, pack, really important. Split applications of nitrogen. A good crop, I think. I'm kind of running out of time, am I? Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm probably. Do you want me to wrap it up, or?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I.
Joel, we've got 2 more speakers.
Yep.
I'd like to try and run noon. So
Sure.
5 more minutes.
Okay. Yeah. No, I won't even take that. Yeah. I've got some other stuff here. There are. If you go to our Quality Seeds website, click on blog, and you know, a lot of this stuff is on the blog. Winter triticale forage, the sorghum Sudan and the Sudan grass, Italian ryegrass, improved alfalfa grass mixtures, explains, you know, the different characteristics of them and why we want to do it. Forage fertility, sulfur. My email address, joel@qualityseeds.ca. Don't know if you can see my phone number there, but call me anytime. I love talking to Jersey people. 2 things I like talking about is forage and Jersey, so this is kind of my, I'm in the zone here. So 705-878-6528. If you want to give me a call, ask a question, I'd love to talk to you.